Hello and welcome back to How Do I Art? I strongly recommend watching the first video. If you're familiar with line weight and shading, then this is a perfect place for you to start. Let's begin. In this video, I'm going to talk about single and double point perspectives. This is going to make your drawings pop more than ever. It's going to create the illusion of depth, and I'm going to explain why single and double point perspectives are extremely important. At the ending of my last video, I created an 8-ball and an eye using hatching and cross hatching techniques. If you notice, the 8 on the 8-ball is slightly in perspective. And I did ask that if some of you wanted to try and figure out how to do this before this video came out, if you have any of your drawings and you wish to share, please go ahead and share what you did, either here or on my Reddit account. If you noticed on the 8-ball, the 8 itself, since it was on top where the light was placed, the 8 itself was lighter. The perspective only gave it that illusion, and that the bottom of the 8 was closer to the viewer than the top. Now with the cross-hatching eye, the iris was on its side, while the light again was coming more from on top of the sphere. The iris itself, towards the bottom, you're able to see more of it because it was still in shadow, while the light was slightly fading the actual top part of the iris. These right here are perfect examples of depth and what you're able to do with it. Remember, lighting is extremely important. That's why I started with line weight and shading. But in order to get to this point, we need to start at the basics. Having depth in whatever you do and really good light sources can really change the meaning of what you're trying to say. This is actually the first time I've done miniature sculpting, so this was actually pretty fun, and I might have a separate course on this later on. Something you're going to notice that I really enjoy doing is having different light sources and playing around with light sources. And it's something that you should really pay attention to when you're doing anything artistic. It should be something that is constantly in the back of your mind on everything that you do. So as you can see here, these objects are just floating in space. This one in particular is actually in a correct perspective. I've erased the lines and the dots, but let me show you how I got to this point. In my last video, drawing shadows can make an object grounded, but it's still in space. It's not correct. So in order to get that object grounded, we need to put it in perspective. So you're going to want to grab your ruler, make a horizontal line, and we're going to start with the single point perspective. So on that line, you can place a dot anywhere. It doesn't matter where on the line you place it. Then we're going to start drawing either a square or a rectangle. This square or rectangle that you end up drawing is going to be the foundation to whatever else you may be drawing. Let's say a figure in some type of pose, what have you. Or you really just want to draw a good box in perspective. So the dots right here basically represent the furthest point of your vision. All lines lead straight to that point. This horizontal line that goes right through it is basically your height. Anything below this horizontal line will have a particular angle. And same thing with anything above this line. When you're going to draw anything in perspective, it's always really good to create a particular shape that's easy to work with, like squares and rectangles. Very simple because those have specific points that you're able to grab onto, in a sense. And when you get into figure drawing, it's going to help you a lot that you already know this and have perfected it. But in order to get there, you have to start here. Let's start with the single point perspective. So regardless if you're making a square or a rectangle, you want to have 3 vertical lines and all at the same height. Whatever the height may be, the important part is that they all connect to the single point perspective. So once you have all 3 lines that are going to make the front and side of your box or rectangle, the very bottom and the very top of the further 2 lines are going to be completely horizontal. Your line in the center is going to be connected to that single point. So basically you're going to end up with something looking like this. Now once you have this box or rectangle, if you're doing a figure, you would draw your figure within this box. But since we're staying away from figures for now, this is as far as the single point perspective gets. Now, within this illusionary triangle, you're able to make as many other boxes or rectangles as you want. You can draw another one in the center or another one all the way to the right of your page. As long as they all connect in this very same way to that point, you would have whatever you're drawing in perspective. The only time that this changes is if the object that you're drawing is no longer on this horizontal line. If it's completely above or completely below the horizontal line, this is where it slightly changes. Let's do that now real quick. So this is how it's going to look once you do that. It's basically going to be the same thing, but you can see how it changes when you're working around this single point perspective. Now let's get a little bit more creative. How do you do this with a circle? Like I said before, circles are a little bit more complex because they don't have any particular point that you can grab onto. So how do you do this with a circle? Or I should say a sphere. One trick that you can do is placing a point within that shape. Let's say you make a box. You want to place a single dot around the corners in order to get a proper circle within that square, as if it was a flat surface. Let's not think about 3D. Let's think about each side as a flat surface. Some people can eyeball this and can just draw the sphere within the box and get a proper drawing that way. Some people use this point and are able to draw circles within the boxes in order to create this imaginary sphere within their painting. It's still complex, and really the only way to get better at this is by practicing. But like I said, once you have this down, it's a lot easier. So let's give it a try real quick before moving on to 2-point perspectives. In reality, we already know how to do this. You're basically creating this sphere within the box. So setting aside all the mathematical part and whatnot, the easiest way to think about this is just creating a circle and then just giving that illusion of depth and making it round with your shading. But you're basically placing an imaginary ball within this shape. Now, the reason why this is important in order to create the box, in order to get the perspective of the ball correctly, is because since it's a round object, you're basically just shrinking down or enlarging the size of the sphere. Because there are no corners, perspective drawings of round objects can only work this way. So you're basically just drawing this box in order to get the correct size of your sphere. Because as it gets closer to the point of perspective, it becomes smaller, just like any other object within that drawing. Now in real life, you measure with your pencil or the tool that you're using. But I'll get more into this once we get to that point. But when you're doing a drawing like this, it becomes more time consuming. So it's not necessarily more complex. And when we get into figure drawing or what have you, the figure is going to be broken down into these other shapes, which is why I'm starting with this as a basis. You also may be thinking that, why don't I just draw the sphere without doing all this trouble of drawing another shape in order to place this ball or what have you inside of it? Well, if you just draw it, there's going to be a point where something looks off, and that something that's off is going to be that round object. So you're going to put a whole bunch of time and effort into a drawing, and then you find out that something is wrong with something that should be really easy and basic. Now with 2 points, depending on whatever side of the object is closest to that particular point, that's where you have to draw your line and connect with that visual point. You're basically doing the same thing as a single point perspective, but it's going to look a little bit more like this. Notice how you can see both sides of whatever shape you made. Each side, like I said earlier, goes directly to that point. And you may be thinking, are there any more perspectives that you can draw this shape from? And the answer is yes, there is a 3-point perspective. And this is how it looks like. I'm not really going to touch up on it because once you know a single and a double point perspective, it's basically a combination of the two. And with a 3-point perspective, you see both sides plus the top. And this is really good for drawing skyscrapers, things that are extremely tall past this horizontal line, either extremely above or extremely below. And like I said earlier in the video, the best way to imply this into your drawings, single point perspectives work in certain situations where you're trying to focus the viewer to one particular spot, like looking down a hallway. And it doesn't only have to do with drawing. You can actually apply this to film, photography, anything you actually put your mind to it, and it gives your project a little bit more of a dramatic perspective. With 2-point perspectives, you're typically dealing with landscapes, large areas, that makes it necessary in order to capture the full picture or idea that you're trying to convey. And when you're doing a drawing or whatever, your point of view can actually be off the frame of your project. This makes your drawing or whatever you're doing a little bit more like you're looking out a window. It gives a little realism to it. And once we start getting into more detail and using what we've already learned in other projects, I'm going to show you how to create the illusion of things that are further away and how they need to look like in order for your drawing or what have you to look a little bit more realistic. And if you're doing a cartoon, this is going to say so much about what you're able to do, like properly setting a character within a world that looks almost welcoming or something that almost looks like you can jump into. So the more you practice this, the better your art's going to become. On top of using line weights and shadows, having these perspectives are going to completely change everything that you do. And if you have any questions about 3-point perspectives, please don't hesitate to ask. I can always touch up on this further in detail. And this has been another episode of How Do I Art? See you next time. And for those of you who are interested in filmmaking and how exactly I did that little effect there, please stay tuned. I will eventually have courses on how to do that. It's going to be a little bit of time until I get there because I want to set in the groundwork before skipping ahead to that point, because everything I'm showing is very interconnected with other types of art. So please stay tuned. I will be doing much more.